I have watched men do foolish things for money, and I have watched men do foolish things for love, and I have come to believe those are the only two reasons a person ever climbs down into the dark. But the night Cole Merrick lowered himself into that dry well on the old Halbrook place, he wasn't chasing either one. He was chasing a sound. A small, thin, animal sound that had no business existing at the bottom of a hole nobody had used in 40 years. I told him not to go. I stood at the lip of that well with a lantern shaking in my hand, and I told him the rope was rotten and the air down there could stop a man's heart, and he looked up at me with that crooked half-grin of his and said, "Then you'll have a story to tell." I have that story now. I would trade it back in a heartbeat for the man. My name doesn't matter much to what happened, but you should know I keep a journal, have since I was a boy, and everything I'm about to tell you I wrote down that same night by the light of a coal oil lamp, my hands still smelling of wet rope and something worse. I'm not a man who believes in signs or fate or the finger of God moving across the plains. I believe in cattle, in weather, in the ache in my knee that tells me rain is coming. But I will tell you honestly, what Cole found at the bottom of that well changed the shape of everything I thought I knew about what one human being will do for another. Stay with me. This story earns its silence at the end. I promise you that much. The rope was already burning through my palms before I understood what was happening. It was the first week of September, that stretch of year when the days still cook you, but the nights come down cold and honest, and the light goes the color of a bruise around 7 o'clock. We've been fixing fence all day along the north line where the Halbrook property butts up against ours. My grandfather bought the 200 acres back in the 30s, but the house and the old homestead well had sat abandoned since before I was born. The Halbrooks were gone, dead or scattered, nobody remembered which. All that was left of them was a caved-in barn, a chimney standing alone like a gravestone, and that well, capped with rotting boards and a rusted iron ring. Cole heard it before I did. He always did have ears like a coyote. We were coiling wire, both of us bone-tired and thinking about supper when he went still. Just stopped, one hand on the fence post, his head tilted the way a dog tilts its head at a whistle you can't hear. "You hear that?" he said. I didn't. I told him it was the wind through the barn boards, or a barn owl, or nothing at all, which is what most sounds turn out to be. But he was already walking toward the well, slow at first, then quicker, and I followed him because that's what I'd always done. Cole Merrick and I had been riding together for 11 years by then. He'd pulled me out from under a rolled truck once, dislocated his own shoulder doing it, and never let me forget it, and never once asked for a thing in return. When a man like that walks toward a hole in the ground, you follow him. You just do. We pulled the rotten boards off the well mouth and the smell came up at us. Damp stone, old mud, something green and mineral. And under it all, faint but unmistakable now that we were close, a sound. A crying, thin and cracked and small. "It's a kid," Cole said, and the blood went right out of his face. I put my hand on his arm. I told him it couldn't be a kid, that no child could have gotten out this far, that we were 4 miles from the nearest road and the well was capped. I told him it was probably a coyote pup fallen in, or a lamb, or a trick of the echo. But even as I said it, my stomach was folding in on itself, because I heard it too now, and it didn't sound like any animal I'd ever known. It sounded like grief with a human throat. Cole was already tying the rope to the iron ring. "That ring's rusted through," I said. "That rope's been in the truck bed since spring. It's dry-rotted." "Cole, listen to me." "Then hold the other end," he said, and grinned at me, and that was when he said the thing about the story. "Then you'll have a story to tell." And he swung his legs over the lip and started down. I want to stop here and tell you something about Cole, because if I just tell you what happened you'll think he was reckless, and he wasn't. Reckless men die young and stupid and leave a mess. Cole was the most careful man I ever knew. He checked his cinch twice every morning. He never rode a fence line without telling somebody where he'd be. He carried a little notebook in his shirt pocket. I used to tease him about it, said we made a matched pair, both of us scribblers. And in it he kept the birthdays of every child in 3 families. his and his sister's and the Ramirez family that worked the South Spread. He remembered things. He showed up. When old man Ramirez's wife was dying, it was Cole who sat up with her 3 nights running so her husband could sleep. Cole who held a stranger's hand in the dark because nobody should die alone. That was the man going down into that well. Not a fool. A man who could not, constitutionally could not, walk away from a sound like that. There's a thing I've noticed about the 2 ways a man can be brave. There's the loud kind, the kind that gets told in barrooms, the kind that comes on quick and burns out fast. A man throwing a punch, charging a line, doing something fool and grand while the blood's up. And then there's the quiet kind, the kind that has to keep on being brave hour after the excitement's gone, when the body's cold and the pains set in, and there's nobody watching and no glory in it. Any man might manage the first kind once. It's the second kind that tells you who a person is. I didn't know yet, kneeling at that well mouth, that the night was going to ask Cole for the second kind. The long kind. The kind that has to last from dusk till dawn in a stone hole with 2 broken legs. I only knew the first act, the falling. I didn't yet know how much harder the staying would be. The rope paid out through my hands. I'd braced my boots against the iron ring and looped the line around my back the way you do for a hard pull, and I fed it out slow, foot by foot, listening to Cole call up the depth. 10 feet, he said. His voice already had that hollow ringing to it, the sound of a man in a stone throat. 15. It's dry down here, thank God. 20. The crying was louder now, and it had changed. When Cole's boots got close to it, it changed, rose up sharp and frightened, then broke into a kind of babbling. And that was the moment my whole understanding of the night came apart, because words came up out of that well. Not animal sounds. Words. It's talking, I called down, my voice cracked like a boy's. Cole, what is it saying? There was a long silence, longer than I liked. The rope had gone slack in my hands, which meant he'd found bottom, which meant he was standing on something, and I could hear him breathing hard, and I could hear the small voice. And then I heard Cole Merrick make a sound I had never heard him make in 11 years. A sound like the wind got knocked out of him. A sound like a man who's been struck. Cole. It's a girl, he said, and his voice was wrong, thick. It's a little girl. I have gone over what happened next 1,000 times, trying to fit it into an order that makes sense. And I can't, not entirely, because down at the bottom of that well time did something strange. It stretched and doubled back, and up top I was living in a different clock than Cole was. So let me tell it the way I understand it now, after everything, rather than the way I lived it standing there with rope tearing my hands. The girl was maybe 6 years old. She was filthy, half-starved, her lips cracked white with thirst, wearing a nightgown that had once been yellow. She had been down that well for, we would learn later, the better part of 3 days. How she'd survived the fall we never fully understood. There was a heap of old rotten hay and burlap at the bottom, dumped down there decades ago, that must have broken it. How she'd survived 3 days with no water was a harder question, until Cole found the answer. And the answer is the thing that took the words out of him. There was a seep in the wall, a slow weep of groundwater no bigger than a tear, coming through the old stones about waist high. And beneath it in the mud were the marks of small fingers where a child had scraped and pressed and licked moisture from the wall for 3 days to stay alive. 6 years old, alone in the dark, and she had not laid down and given up. She had found the one wet stone in a stone tomb, and she had kept herself breathing, one drop at a time, waiting for someone to come. I have thought a great deal in the years since about those 3 days, about what they must have been. A well is not just dark. It is a particular kind of dark, a dark with a lid on it, where the little coin of gray sky far overhead moves and changes and finally goes black and then comes gray again, so that a child could count the days by it if a child that small knew to count. 3 times that coin of sky went dark. 3 times it came back. She told us later, in the small pieces a child tells things, that at night she'd hear the coyotes and she'd sing to herself so she wouldn't hear them so loud. That she'd been afraid the man, she called every grown-up the man or the lady, would forget to look. That she'd made a deal with God, the kind of bare plain deal that only children and dying men know how to make, and the deal was, if somebody comes, I'll be good forever. She kept telling us that afterward in the truck in the hospital. I'll be good forever. As if being found had a price and she was terrified of failing to pay it. I have never in my life wanted so badly to take a child by the shoulders and tell her that she owed the universe nothing, that she had already been braver at 6 than most of us manage in 80 years, that the only debt in the whole affair ran the other way. I did try to tell her. I don't know that she believed me. Children who have been left to save themselves learn a lesson about the world that no amount of telling ever quite unteaches. Cole told me later, much later when he could talk about it, that what undid him wasn't her crying. It was that she stopped crying the moment she saw his light. Stopped and looked up at him with these enormous solemn eyes and said, in a voice gone to gravel, I knew somebody would come. I told myself somebody would come. 6 years old. I told myself somebody would come. Up top, I knew none of this yet. All I knew was that Cole's voice had gone strange and the rope was slack, and I was shouting down into the dark for him to answer me, and finally he did. I'm gonna send her up, he called. I'm gonna tie her to the rope, you're gonna pull her up slow, you hear me? Slow. She's light as a bird but she's hurt, her arms hurt, don't let her bang the walls. What about you? Send her up first. Cole, the rope. It won't take 2 trips, that rope's about done, I can feel it going. Then it takes 1, he said, send her up first. I want you to understand what he was saying because he understood it, standing down there in the dark. He was telling me that if the rope had 1 good pull left in it, 1, then that pull belonged to the girl. He'd done the arithmetic in the half-second it takes a decent man to do it, which is to say he hadn't done arithmetic at all. He'd just known. The way he'd known to walk toward the sound in the first place. I felt the weight come onto the rope. Light. God, so light. I hauled her up hand over hand, my boots braced and slipping, and every foot of it I was praying to a God I don't talk to, praying the fibers would hold and I could feel them going. Little pops and gives running up the line like the rope was made of held breath. When her small, dirty hands came over the lip of the well, I dropped the rope and grabbed her under the arms and pulled her against my chest, and she was so light and so cold and she was alive. She was breathing. She turned her face up to the last of the light and squinted and said, Where's the man? Where's the man? I set her down soft in the grass. I threw the rope back down. Cole, grab on, I've got you, grab on. I felt his weight come onto the line. He's a big man, Cole, 200 pounds of muscle and stubbornness, and I set my heels and I pulled, and I got him up maybe 4 feet 5. I heard his boots scrabbling on the old stones, and then I heard the rope let go. Not all at once. That's the thing I can't get out of my head. It didn't snap clean. It tore slow, strand by strand, a sound like fabric ripping, and I lunged for it and got a fistful of frayed nothing, and I heard Cole hit the bottom. The silence after was the loudest thing I have ever heard. Cole. For a long moment, the longest of my life, nothing. And then from the bottom of that well, floating up out of the dark, his voice, strained, but alive. I'm okay, he called. Landed on the hay, I think, a grunt, a pause. I think my legs broke, both of 'em maybe, but I'm okay. Is she up? Is the girl up? She's up, she's safe, she's right here. Good, he said. And I swear to you, from the bottom of a well with 2 broken legs in the dark, the man laughed. A short, wrecked, exhausted laugh. Good. Told you you'd have a story. I knelt there at the lip of the well with a 6-year-old girl shivering against me and my best friend broken at the bottom of the earth, and the light dying out of the sky. 4 miles from the nearest road. No rope, no ladder, no way down and no way up. And I understood with a terrible clarity that the night was not over. It was, in fact, only beginning. The girl tugged at my sleeve. Her name, she told me, was Ellie. She was cold. She wanted the man to come up. She wanted her mother. And as she said it, as the word mother came out of her cracked little mouth, a new horror opened up under me like the well itself, because I realized I had no idea where this child had come from, or how she'd gotten here, or who had lost her, or whether whoever lost her even knew she was gone. 3 days in a well 4 miles from any road. Somebody had been looking for 3 days. Or, and this was the thought that turned my blood to ice water, somebody hadn't. I pulled off my coat and wrapped it around her. I told her the man's name was Cole, and that he was the bravest man I knew, and that I was going to get him out, and that everything was going to be all right. I told her all the things you tell a child. And then I stood up and I looked at the truck, 1/2 mile off across the dark pasture, and I looked at the well, and I started doing the arithmetic Cole had refused to do. How long to drive for help? How long for help to come? How cold the night? How a man with 2 broken legs does at the bottom of a well through the long hours of the dark. And none of the numbers came out the way I wanted them to. Cole, I called down. I've got to drive for help, the truck. It'll be a couple hours, maybe more. Can you hold on? Can you hold on that long? A pause, then, take the girl, get her warm, get her to a doctor. Don't you leave her out there in the cold to sit with me, you hear? She goes with you. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me, you're going for help, that's different, and take the girl. His voice was patient, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse. Hey, listen, I'm all right down here, it's not so bad, it's kind of peaceful actually, a beat. Except for the part where both my legs are broke and I'm at the bottom of a well, aside from that. And there it was, the joke, cracked and thin, sent up out of the dark to make it easier on me. To make it easier on me. That was Cole all over, lying broken at the bottom of a hole and using what strength he had left to lighten the load on the man standing safe at the top. I have known a lot of kinds of courage in my life. I have known men who charged into fires and men who faced down bulls and men who took bad news standing up. But I don't know that I have ever known anything braver than the sound of Cole Merrick making a joke from the bottom of that well, so that I could get in the truck and drive away without my heart breaking clean in two. It broke anyway, just so you know, it broke anyway. But before I could go, before I could make myself go, there was the matter of the water. Ellie was still tugging at me, whispering that the man down the hole was thirsty, that he'd said his throat hurt, that he'd given her his water. And when she said it, I stopped cold, because there'd been no water down that well but the seep in the wall. And if Cole had given the girl water, it meant he'd carried a canteen down with him. And I remembered then that he had. The little dented tin canteen that had been his father's, that he filled every morning and hung from his belt. He'd have given it to her. Of course he had. He'd sent the girl up with the water and kept the empty tin for himself. I made myself picture it, and then I made myself stop picturing it. I had a jug in the truck bed, near full, and a coil of good nylon lariat. Not enough to climb, not near enough to reach bottom, but enough to lower a jug. I ran for it, my boots loud on the hard ground, and I came back and I tied that water jug to the good rope, and I called down to Cole to feel for it. And I let it down slow into the dark until I felt the line go slack and heard him grunt and say he had it. Drink, I told him. All of it. Don't be a hero about the water at least. Now he tells me, Cole said, and I heard him drink, long and desperate. A sound that told me more about his 3 minutes of thirst than any words could, and made me think of the girl's 3 days. And made something clench in my chest that has never entirely let go. There's a girl up here says you gave her your canteen, I said. A pause, water sloshing. She was Littler, he said, like that settled it, like that was arithmetic too, and I suppose to Cole it was. I lowered him down my coat next. I'd wrapped Ellie in it, but she was going in the warm truck now and Cole was staying in the cold ground, and the arithmetic there was easy for once. And I lowered the truck's emergency blanket, the crinkly foil kind, and a book of matches, though there was nothing down there dry enough to burn, and my own gloves, and I would have lowered him the whole truck if the rope had been long enough. It's a strange thing, the way you'll grab at any small mercy when the large ones are out of reach. I couldn't get him out, so I sent him water and wool and foil and matches, a little bundle of caring lowered into the dark, as if love could be measured out in what a short rope will carry. "Quit fussing over me and get that child to a doctor," Cole called up, but his voice was softer now. He knew what I was doing. He let me do it. That was its own kind of gift, letting me feel like I could help him when we both knew how little I could. I gathered up little Ellie, who had gone quiet and limp with exhaustion, and I carried her across that dark pasture toward the truck with the cold coming down hard now and the first stars pricking through. And behind me I could hear Cole calling out, keeping his voice up so I'd know he was all right, singing "God Help Me," some old trail song about a river and a girl waiting on the far side, his voice getting fainter and fainter as I walked away, until the wind and the distance swallowed it. And there was only the crunch of my boots on the dry grass, and the small weight of the child breathing against my neck, and the terrible growing dark. I laid Ellie on the truck seat and I got behind the wheel, and my hands were shaking so bad it took me 3 tries to get the key in, and just before I turned it, I looked back one more time at that black shape of the well out in the field, and I made myself a promise. I don't make promises. I've seen too many of them broken. But I made one that night, out loud, to the dark and to God and to whatever was listening. The cab smelled of the girl now, of mud and old sweat, and the sour thin smell of a body that's been 3 days without water, and under it the ordinary smells of my truck, of dust and leather and the peppermints I keep in the door pocket. And there is something about those two smells together, the smell of a catastrophe and the smell of an ordinary Tuesday, that I have never been able to put down since. I smell peppermint now, and I am back in that cab with my hands shaking on the key. Some things mark you like that. They pick a smell, a sound, a slant of light, and they hang the whole night on it, and it swings there in you for the rest of your life, ready to drop. Ellie stirred and murmured something and reached out one small hand in her sleep and closed it around 2 of my fingers, the way a baby will, gripping without waking, and held on. And I sat there for a moment I couldn't afford, a whole precious moment I should have spent driving, just feeling that small hand hold my fingers in the dark, because it struck me all at once, sitting there, that this was the whole of it. This was the thing Cole had gone down into the ground for and might not come back up from. This. A small hand holding on. Not a grand thing, the smallest thing in the world, and the biggest. "I'm coming back for you, Cole. You hold on, I am coming back." Then I turned the key, and I drove. I did not yet know what I would find when I returned. I did not know about the storm that was already building black in the west, or the truth about where Ellie had come from, or the thing Cole would say to me in the gray hours before dawn that I have never repeated to another living soul until now. All I knew, driving through that dark with a lost child asleep beside me and my best friend broken behind me, was that some nights ask everything of you, and you don't get to know in advance whether you have it to give. The road came up in the headlights, pale and empty and endless. I drove faster. The nearest phone was at the Kessler place, 6 miles by the county road, and I drove those 6 miles like a man being chased, which in a way I was, chased by the clock, by the cold, by the picture in my head of Cole down in that hole with the temperature dropping. Ellie slept the whole way, that bottomless sleep of a body that has finally been allowed to stop fighting. I kept one hand on her the whole drive, some animal part of me needing to feel her breathe. Ada Kessler answered her door in a housecoat with her hair in a net, and one look at my face was all it took. She was a widow past 70 who'd buried a husband and 2 grown sons, and there was nothing left in this world that could rattle her. And I have thanked God more than once for hard old women like Ada Kessler, who do not faint and do not flutter, and do not waste your time with questions when the barn's on fire. I said, "Man down a well, child near dead, call the sheriff and the fire department and Doc Hendry, Wells on the old Halbrook place North Line, tell them to bring rope and lights and a litter." And she was already dialing before I finished, already barking it into the phone in that flat, hard voice, and she took Ellie out of my arms and wrapped her in a quilt off her own bed and said, "Go. I've got the child. Go back to your man. Go back to your man." I want to tell you I hesitated over leaving Ellie, and I did, for about 1 second, but Ada Kessler had already turned her back on me and was carrying that child to the fire, and I knew a lost cause when I saw one, and anyway every cell in my body was screaming toward the well. So I went. I took a coil of Ada's clothesline and a barn lantern, and I drove back out into the dark faster than I'd come, and the first fat drops of rain hit the windshield just as I bounced off the county road onto the ranch track, and I thought, no, no, not the rain, anything but the rain. Because here is the thing about an old dry well in a hard rain. It does not stay dry. I got back to the well maybe 40 minutes after I'd left it, and the rain was coming steady now, cold and mean, the kind of September rain that means business, and I ran to the lip and I shouted down into the dark, "Cole, I'm back. Help's coming, you hear me. Help is coming." And his voice came up, and it was weaker than before, slower, the cold getting into it, but it came up. "Took your time," he said. I laughed and it came out closer to a sob. Traffic was murder. The girl. Safe, warm, Ada Kessler's got her. Ambulance is coming for her. A long pause, then quiet, almost too quiet to hear over the rain. Good, that's good. And then, it's raining down here now. You feel it up there. My stomach dropped clean through the earth. How much water, Cole? Little bit, coming in from that seep and running down the walls now. Up past my ankles, I think. Hard to feel my feet, so hard to say. He said it lightly. He said it the way you'd remark on the score of a ball game, but I understood and he understood what it meant. A man who cannot stand, at the bottom of a hole that is beginning to fill with water, is doing a very specific and terrible kind of arithmetic. And this time the numbers were about how fast the water came in against how fast the help arrived. Get up on something, I said. The hay, though, is there anything to get up on? Working on it, he grunted, and I heard him moving down there, heard him drag himself, heard a sound of pain he tried to swallow and couldn't quite, and I knelt at that well mouth in the pouring rain, and I have never felt so useless in the whole of my life. There was a man dying by inches 30 feet below me, and all I could do was talk. So I talked. I talked to keep him awake, to keep him with me, to keep the cold and the water from pulling him down into that sleep a body reaches for when it's given up. I have since learned, I looked it up the way you'll pick at a wound, that this is a real thing, that a body chilling in cold water starts to fail in an order, that the shivering comes first, and then the confusion, and then a strange false warmth, a feeling of being cozy that is in fact the body giving up its last held heat, and that men have been known in that stage to take off their coats, to smile, to lie down in the snow as if into a bed. I didn't know the science that night. I only knew, in the way you know things about a person you love, that there was a version of Cole that would go quiet and peaceful and slip away, and that my one job, my only job, the single thing left to me up there in the useless rain, was to keep the man annoyed and arguing and awake. Peace was the enemy. I needed him irritable. I needed him. So I picked fights. I told him the mare he was so proud of was ugly. I told him his sister's chili was better than his and always had been. I told him he owed me $19 from a card game in 1974, and I intended to collect it with interest. And he came right up off the bottom of that well to inform me it had been a legitimate bluff and I'd folded like a cheap tent. And for a minute, one blessed minute, we were just two men arguing about a card game, and he was warm with the arguing, and I blessed every stupid grievance we'd ever nursed between us, because each one was a rope I could throw down into the dark. I talked about everything. I talked about the time we got drunk in Amarillo and he tried to ride a mechanical bull and got thrown into a nacho stand. I talked about his sister's kids. I talked about the mare he'd been training, the ornery one, and how she'd finally taken the bit that week, and he said, faint, knew she would. Just had to let her think it was her idea. And I asked him the names of things, math problems, the words to that trail song, anything to keep his voice coming up out of the dark, because as long as his voice came up he was alive, and as long as he was alive there was a chance. The rain would slack and then come harder. I could see nothing down the well but black, not even with the lantern, the light just dying a few feet down into that wet throat of stone. Every so often I'd hear a splash that meant he'd shifted, or the water had risen, and I'd stop breathing until his voice came again. Time did the thing it does in the worst hours, stretching and pooling, so that I could not have told you if I'd been kneeling there 20 minutes or 2 hours. My knees went numb on the wet iron. The lantern guttered and I trimmed it with shaking hands and cursed it and it caught again. And still no lights on the county road. And still the rain. It was during one of those long talking spells, with the rain hissing down and the water rising around him, that Cole said the thing. The thing I have never told anyone until now. He'd gone quiet for a stretch that scared me and I'd shouted and he'd come back and his voice when it came was different. Lower. The joking gone out of it. And he said, "Hey, I need to tell you something in case." "There's no in case. Help's coming, you just." "In case," he said again gently, and something in the gentleness shut me up. And then Cole Merrick told me from the bottom of a flooding well that 30 years ago, when he was a boy of 11, he'd had a little sister. That there'd been a pond on his family's place and a summer day, and that he'd been supposed to be watching her, and that he'd looked away. Just looked away, the way an 11-year-old does, at a dragonfly or a cloud or nothing at all. And that when he looked back the water was smooth and empty and she was gone. That they'd pulled her out but it was too late. That he had never told a soul, not the whole of it, not the part where it had been his to watch her, and that his family had never once blamed him out loud, but that he had blamed himself every single day for 30 years, and that he had spent his entire life since then, though he'd never have put it in these words, running toward every drowning thing he could find because he had failed to run toward the one that mattered. "When I heard that girl crying today," he said, and his voice broke and the rain came down, "I thought, I finally got here in time, you understand. For once in my life I finally got there in time." A long, ragged breath. "So don't you dare feel sorry for me down here. Don't you dare. This is the best thing I ever did. This is the thing I was for." I could not answer him. I knelt in the rain with my forehead against the wet iron ring, and I could not make a single sound come out, because the whole shape of the man I'd known for 11 years had just turned over in front of me and shown me its underside. And it was grief. All the way down. Grief worn smooth by 30 years of carrying. And out of that grief, he had built the kindest life I ever witnessed. And now here he was at the bottom of the earth calling it the best thing he ever did. I understood in that moment that I had spent 11 years being loved by a man who was trying to save a little girl from a pond that had been dry for 30 years. And that today, at last, the water had given her back. "Cole," I finally managed. "Cole, she made it because of you. She's alive because of you." "I know," he said, "and I swear there was something like peace in it. I know she is, that's what I'm telling you." The lights came at 3:40 in the morning. I heard them before I saw them. The far-off wail of the siren coming up the county road, then the diesel roar of the fire truck laboring across the pasture, headlights swinging wild through the rain. And I stood up and I screamed and waved the lantern like a madman. And they came, God bless them. They came bouncing across that field with their lights blazing, the volunteer fire crew and the sheriff and old Doc Hendry, men I'd known my whole life. Hauling ropes and a winch and a rescue litter, and a portable light that turned the whole scene white and stark and blessedly visible. I found out later why it had taken so long. The wash between the county road and the Halbrook place had flooded in the rain, and the fire truck had bogged to its axles trying to cross, and those men had gotten out in the downpour and cut brush and jacked and pushed and half-carried that truck across by main force, 6 of them shoulder to the fender in the mud, because there was a man down a well and no flooded wash was going to be the reason they didn't get to him. Nobody paid them for that. They were volunteers, everyone. The feed store clerk, 2 brothers who ran the garage, a school teacher, a preacher, a boy barely out of high school. Men who'd left warm beds in the middle of a black rainy night and ruined their clothes and their backs shoving a fire truck through a flood for a stranger, or as good as, because that is simply what those men understood a person was for. I have thought about them as much as I've thought about anything. Cole went down the well alone, but it took a whole county to bring him up, and I have never since been able to swallow the notion that people are no good at heart. I've seen too many of them shoulder deep in the mud at 3 in the morning for somebody they'd never met. They rigged the winch fast. A young fireman named Petey Alcorn, skinny enough to fit the shaft, went down on a proper harness with a headlamp and a second harness for Cole, and I stood at the edge with my heart going like a trip hammer, and the water was near 3 feet deep at the bottom by then. We'd cut it that close, that terribly close, and I heard Petey reach him, and I heard the two of them working, Cole cursing and laughing weak while they got the harness under him, and then the winch was turning. The cable coming up wet and gleaming in the white light, and then Cole Merrick came up out of that well. Muddy, broken, soaked to the skin, blue-lipped, shaking so hard his teeth clattered, both legs splinted crooked with the first aid boards Petey'd carried down, grinning like the devil himself. They laid him on the litter and Doc Hendry was on him in a second, and Cole's eyes were searching the crowd and they found me, and he lifted one shaking muddy hand about 2 inches off the litter, which was all he had the strength for, and he said, through the chattering of his teeth, "Told you, you got a story." And I took that muddy shaking hand in both of mine, and I held on and I could not speak, and I did not need to, because after 11 years there are some things that pass between two men without any words at all. He lived. I should say that plainly because I've drawn out the dark so long you've a right to worry. Cole Merrick lived. Both legs were broken in 3 places between them, and he was in casts to the hip for 4 months, and he walks with a hitch to this day and forecasts rain in his shins better than any weatherman. And every bit of it he wears like a badge of honor. And every bit of it I would break my own legs to have spared him, and every bit of it he would tell you he'd do again, without a half-second's hesitation. He is, at the time I write this, sitting on my porch about 40 feet from where I sit, whittling something, complaining that I take too long telling a story. Which I do. He's right about that. But I have not told you the rest of it, and the rest of it is the part that makes this more than a rescue. Ellie, little Ellie in the yellow nightgown, who'd made a deal with God and kept herself alive 1 drop at a time. We learned in the days that followed where she'd come from, and the truth of it was worse than anything I'd imagined out there in the dark, and also, in the end, better. She'd been in a car with her mother 3 days before, out on a ranch road nobody used, and the mother, young, alone, in some private darkness of her own that I will not judge here because I never stood where she was standing, had driven off the road in the night, and the car had gone down a wash and rolled, and the mother had died there at the wheel, and the little girl had climbed out of the wreck in the dark and wandered, a 6-year-old alone, God knows how far across that country in her nightgown, until she'd found an old homestead and an old well with rotten boards over it, and she'd fallen in. 3 days nobody looked because nobody knew. The car was down a wash out of sight of any road. It wasn't found for a week. If Cole Merrick had not heard a sound he couldn't quite hear and walked toward it against all sense, that child would have died at the bottom of that well and no living soul would ever have known she'd been there at all. She'd have been a mystery bone somebody stumbled on in 50 years. Instead she is alive. Instead she lives here now. I'll tell it plain because Cole says I get maudlin. Ellie had no people. The mother's family, what there was of it, was found and turned out to be exactly the sort of family a young mother drives into the dark to escape. And the county was going to put that child into the machinery, the homes and the papers and the strangers. And Cole Merrick, 4 days out of surgery, flat on his back with both legs in the air, told the caseworker in a voice that left no room for discussion that the child was not going anywhere, that she had already survived being left once and would not be left again, and that if the great state of Texas wanted to give a home to a girl who'd kept herself alive at the bottom of a well by sheer stubborn grace, it need look no further than the man who'd broken both his legs going down after her. It took the better part of a year. It took lawyers and inspections and a hard old widow named Ada Kessler swearing to anyone who'd listen that these were fit men, and this was a fit home. And it took Cole learning to walk again with a little girl toddling beside his walker chattering encouragement. And it took, I'll be honest, it took me and Cole having a long, quiet conversation on this same porch about what it meant, the two of us, raising a child together, and what people might say. And neither of us caring in the end one damn bit what people might say. And at the end of that year, on a bright cold morning in a courthouse in the county seat, a judge signed a paper, and Ellie became ours. She's 9 now. She's got a pony that's nearly as ornery as she is and a laugh you can hear across 2 pastures, and she still, sometimes in the deep of the night, wakes up crying from a dream about the dark. And when she does, it's Cole who's there first every time, hitching across the house on those bad legs faster than a whole man ought to move, gathering her up, telling her the same thing every time in the same low voice. I've got you. Somebody came. Somebody will always come. And she settles. And I stand in the hall and I watch, and I do not let either of them see me wipe my face. It has not all been porch suppers and cornbread. I won't pretend it has, because Ellie would read this someday and she'd know I was lying, and I promised her a long time ago I'd never do that. There were hard years in there. A child who spends 3 days at the bottom of a well learning that the world will leave you does not unlearn it because 2 rough old ranchers love her. For a long while she couldn't sleep with the door closed. For a long while she'd hide food. We'd find crackers and hard biscuits squirreled in her boots, under her mattress, in the barn, little caches against a hunger she'd known and did not trust was over. She'd wake screaming. She'd go silent and gray for days at a stretch, and no coaxing would reach her. There was a night she was 7 when she looked up at Cole across the supper table, out of nowhere, out of some abyss of a 7-year-old's grief, and asked him why her real mama hadn't come to find her. And I watched a grown man who'd faced down a flooding well with 2 broken legs sit there with no armor at all, undone, searching, and finally say the only true thing there was to say, which was, I don't know, darlin', I don't know why, but I know she'd have wanted somebody to, and somebody did. That's the work nobody tells you about. The well was the easy part. The well was one night. Loving a broken child back into believing the world might hold her, that was the years. That was Cole getting up every single time in the dark. That was the second kind of bravery, the long kind, the kind that has to keep on going hour after hour and year after year with nobody watching and no glory in it. The kind I told you at the very start tells you who a person really is. Cole had it. He had it in a flooding well, and he had it at 3 in the morning wiping a 9-year-old's tears, and he has it now, calling me a slowpoke through the screen door. And I have spent the better part of my life in the presence of it, and I am the richer for it past any counting. People ask me when they hear the story what Cole found at the bottom of that well. They expect gold or bones or a body or a mystery. They expect a thing, and I never quite know how to answer because the truth is too large and too simple both at once. He found a little girl. That's the true and literal answer. But it's not the whole of it, and you've read this far, so you've earned the whole of it. What Cole Merrick found at the bottom of that well was the one thing he'd been looking for his entire life without ever knowing it. He'd spent 30 years going down into the dark after every drowning thing he could find, trying to save a sister the water had already taken, and he'd never once believed it would balance, never once believed the ledger could come right. And then one September evening he heard a sound he couldn't quite hear, and he walked toward it, the way he always did, expecting nothing, expecting to fail the way he'd secretly always felt he failed. And this time the dark gave something back. That's what left him speechless, not the girl, the mercy of it, the impossible, unearned 30 years late mercy of getting there in time just once when it counted most. A man can carry a great deal of grief in silence for a very long time, But I don't believe there's a man alive who's built to carry that much mercy all at once. It took his voice clean away. It would take anyone's. He's calling me in for supper now. Ellie made cornbread, which means half of its shell, and I'll eat every crumb and tell her it's the best I ever had, because it is. I started this story by telling you I'd trade it back for the man, and that was a lie, or half a one. I said it because I hadn't yet told you the man came home. The truth is I wouldn't trade a minute of it. Not the rope tearing through my hands, not the rain, not the terrible arithmetic in the dark, not 1 second of the worst night of my life, because it bought this porch, this supper, this girl who was going to die alone in the dark, and instead is hollering at me through the screen door that the cornbread's getting cold. Some nights ask everything of you. I said that at the start, and it's true. But every once in a great while, if you're lucky, if you've got a friend who will walk toward a sound against all sense, every once in a while, they give something back.